Hey everybody, we're going to start talking about marine invertebrates. So again, those are animals without a backbone. Most animals on our planet are in this category of marine invertebrates. We, however, are not. If you reach around and touch the back of your back, you'll feel your spine, and that means you have a backbone, you have a spinal cord, so you don't fall into this category. You fall into the category of a chordate. These animals that we're going to be talking about fall into the category of invertebrate, no chordate, no spinal cord. So before we start, I wanted to review taxonomy. We talked about classification, we talked about taxonomy, and we're talking about how animals are organized. We may be looking at physical characteristics, we may be looking at genetic material. More than likely it's a combination of both physical characteristics and genetic material. So we start out with this hierarchy of terms. We start with domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. It's something that we just have to get into our heads and remember. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Really something that we should have in our heads memorized. As you work your way from domain down to species, you're becoming more exclusive. So to explain that, there are only three domains, either archaea, bacteria, or eukarya. Notice that last one, that term eukarya has that term or is related to the term eukaryotic. So these are going to be organisms that are made up of eukaryotic cells. So here we take all of our plants, all of our animals, all living organisms found on our earth, and we've only put them into three separate categories. So you can tell that those categories are pretty inclusive. As we work our way down, we start to make more divisions. We look at how all living organisms are alike or dislike, how those what those characteristics are, and we start to divide them up a little bit more. So we go from 3 domains into 6 kingdoms. From those kingdoms, we then break it up into 36 phylum or phyla. So again, as you're working your way down, you become more and more exclusive. Think about our planet in general. We have one planet. Then we could possibly look at the landmass and look at the 7 different continents. So we went from one planet to 7 continents. And now maybe we break those continents up into countries. And now we have hundreds of countries. We then could break those countries up into states, cities, towns, villages, those types of things. You're becoming more and more exclusive. And that's the same thing that we do with this classification system. As we start from domain all the way down to species, we become more and more exclusive. So when we finally get down to the species level, we really honestly don't know how many species are on our planet. It's estimated that we have over 9 million species on our planet. 2/3 of those probably haven't even been discovered yet. However, it's this idea that it's a way of classifying organisms based on physical characteristics and genetic information. So when we start talking about marine invertebrates, we know that we are in the domain Eukarya. We know we're talking about animals, so we're in kingdom Animalia. So domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, and here we're talking about our invertebrates. So all of these organisms that we're going to be talking about are animals without a backbone. They're known as invertebrates. About 97% of all of the animals on our planet are invertebrates. And that's kind of interesting because if you were to go into an elementary school and you were to ask students to start naming animals, what are the typical responses going to be? Dog, cat, cow, maybe we can get creative and say shark, lion, whale. Well, all of those normal, typical responses that you think about aren't in this group of invertebrates. In fact, it represents a very, very, very small proportion of the animals that live on our planet. About 97% of all animals on our planet don't have that backbone. Most of our animal groups, most of our phyla have representatives of animals in the marine environment. Some of the ones that we're going to talk about are exclusively marine. Some of them have land cousins. Others of them are only found in the marine environment. So again, when we talk about animals, what are the characteristics of animals? We are talking about organisms made of eukaryotic cells, multicellular, and it's going to be interesting as we work through these groups of organisms. You're going to see that some of them are pretty basic. When we look at organization, when we look at the types of cells, the types of tissues, some of them may not have tissues. Some of them may just be very, very simple groups of cells that work together. Others, as we work our way up, you may start to see different tissues, different tissue systems, and it's just an interesting expanse of adaptations that we're going to see. Animals are heterotrophic. That means that they have to go out and eat something else in order to obtain energy. So they're not going to be photosynthetic. They're not going to be chemosynthetic. They require oxygen for aerobic respiration. So again, think about when we're learning about these animals, think about the adaptations that these animals have to have in order to obtain oxygen when they're completely submerged in salt water. Most of the organisms that we're going to talk about, at least part of their life cycle, they're going to be considered mobile. So when we talk about animals, we have a basic body plan. We have either asymmetry, we have radial symmetry, or we have bilateral symmetry. And this is literally talking about how animals' bodies, how the bodies of animals are set up. Our very, very basic animals have no symmetry. So there's no rhyme or reason to how these animals are living, how their bodies are organized. And again, I'll explain an example of that as we start discussing animals. Radial symmetry, think about a pizza. You have a center point and you can cut that pizza into wedges, and every wedge is going to be the same. That's what's known as radial symmetry. So you have a central point and you have equal parts that are divided from that central point. The next one we have is bilateral symmetry. And bilateral, if you notice this word bi meaning two, lateral meaning side, we have an organism that can be divided into a right and a left half. Most of the time, your right and your left half are going to be completely equal. So we have these three body plans: asymmetry, radial, and bilateral. Oftentimes, not always, there's some exceptions, but oftentimes we see the most simple, the least complex organisms showing asymmetry. As we start to get a little bit more complex, we start to see radial symmetry. And then as we move even further into our more complex organisms, that's when we start to see the bilateral symmetry. The other thing that we have when we talk about organisms and their body plans are different sides. So let me give you this example. Here we have some type of polyp. Let's say it's a sea anemone. These organisms are considered to have radial symmetry, and I apologize, that should say maybe symmetry, not necessarily bilateral. But this organism right here, this sea anemone, let's say, its mouth is right here, and it has that center point, and you can see that this is being divided up into that pizza pie, those wedges that are all equal. So each one of those is going to be perfectly equal to each other. This right here where the mouth is, that's known as the oral side, and then opposite of that is known as the aboral side. Anytime you see the word a in front of a word, it means not. So we have the mouth side and we have the not mouth side. And that's what we see with organisms with radial symmetry, just two different sides. And I'm going to go back for a second. If you notice two sides, we have the oral side and then we have the aboral side, or the not the mouth. So organisms radial symmetry, that means two sides. The other thing that we see with bilateral symmetry, so here we have some sort of worm, it's a segmented worm, and this is going to have bilateral symmetry. We can see that it's divided in half and we have a right and a left equal half, or a right and a left half that are equal to each other. With bilateral symmetry organisms, there are actually four sides, and again I'm going to go back. Four sides. We have anterior, posterior, dorsal, and ventral. So the anterior is the side of the mouth, The posterior, this time, is opposite of the mouth, and usually that's where the anus is. So we're looking at the digestive system usually, where the mouth is and where the anus is, and that's what's going to determine anterior and posterior. Then we have dorsal and ventral. So you really have 4 sides to organisms with bilateral symmetry, and you only have 2 sides with organisms with radial symmetry. And again, you're going to see this when we start to look at different organisms and look at those different levels of organization. So last thing real quick, these are the groups of organisms that we're going to be talking about. We have sponges. Their phylum name is Porifera. We have cnidarians. Their phylum name is Cnidaria. The C is silent. Here we're talking about jellies, sea anemones, corals. We have comb jellies. Their phyla name is Ctenophore. So again, the C is silent. We have a group of worms, flatworms, that are called Platyhelminthes. So this is the phylum name, Platyhelminthes, and these are our flatworms. I always remember it, flat and plat go together. Our ribbon worms are known as Nemertea. Our nematodes are known as Nematoda. We're not going to be talking about arrow worms too much. We're going to skip and go into segmented worms, and those are Annelidas. And again, we're going to be skipping over this group a little bit, going into mollusca. Those are our mollusks. So think about clams, oysters, even our squids and octopus are in the mollusk or mollusca phylum. We have arthropods that are in phylum Arthropoda. Bryozoans, we have Phoronidid or Phoronida. Sorry, sometimes these pronunciations are a little hard. Lampshells, the Brachiopoda. This is always my favorite one, Echinodermata. Echino means spiny, and if you think about it, a dermatologist is your skin doctor. So our spiny skin, these are going to be our sea urchins and our sand dollars, even our sea cucumbers fall into this category. And then we're going to finish with these 2 groups that are really quite interesting, because these are going to be the ones that are most closely related to us in terms of physical characteristics. And it's going to be interesting when we actually look at pictures of those types of organisms, because if you think of all of the organisms we talk about and we're getting to organisms that are most closely related to us, you're probably thinking that these organisms are going to look very complex. And I think you're going to be kind of surprised when you see these organisms and what they actually look like. So take a minute. If you need to watch this again, please do. You'll have some questions to answer, and then we're going to continue on with the first group of organisms.